Alright, so I'm doing my best to get this video out before the spring sale is over. Hopefully that is true. If not, I'm so sorry. But if so, then some of these games will definitely be worth your time. And honestly, the reason it took longer to get out than normal is because I just got really into a few of the games on this list and kind of lost track of time. So all that being said, let's just go ahead and talk about a few of the games that I picked up during the spring sale. And to mix things up a little bit, I thought this time we would kind of list the games out in order of visual fidelity, starting at the low end and then working up to the prettiest game. So all that being said, let's just go ahead and kick this off with an old school point-and-click PC adventure, The Last Door. Now, I literally had no idea what to expect from this one. The only thing that I knew was that it came highly recommended from one of my oldest friends who I've been playing horror games with or just chatting about horror games with for almost 20 years at this point. Which is to say his word carries a lot of weight with me, and he definitely wasn't kidding because this is a shockingly good horror experience that manages to do a lot with a little. The game is set in October 1891 in Sussex, England, and after an event I won't spoil here, you'll be tasked with exploring a creepy old mansion. And I'm really being cautious here, doing my best not to spoil like the first 5 minutes or so of the game, because once the story gets going, it really is an intriguing tale right from the jump. And beyond the story itself, the pixel art aesthetic works tremendously well here. The art is just so good, and it perfectly communicates the setting even with just a few colors in play. And it's not just visually stunning, but as a natural extension of being a point-and-click game, it's effortless to play. Nothing is unclear, and it might be one of the best examples of game design I've seen in a long time. You literally only point and click, and everything behaves in exactly the way you'd expect it to. And that effortlessness really best showed itself to me here in the foyer of the house. From the position you can see on screen, if you go to the top, you can go back outside of the mansion. If you go to the right, you can enter one of the rooms, and if you look to the left, you can maybe climb some stairs, or is that an entirely new area that's still on the first floor? Although when you finally do click on that area, you'll find that the only thing you can do is take the stairs, so all this is to say that even though it looks like there might be some murkiness in the point-and-click nature of the environments with its old-school graphical approach, it's all incredibly streamlined and easy to understand, and I didn't find myself misclicking or getting lost whatsoever. Which is to say it strips away any friction and in turn frustration that might detract from your exploring, gathering clues, and unraveling where this spooky, sad tale goes. And make no mistake, it is definitely a harrowing and pretty depressing tale right out of the gate. But for all of The Last Door's melancholic undertones that thread throughout its opening hours, it also brings some legitimately brilliant touches that take full advantage of the fact that the story is being told in a game. One specific example is here. As I got a little bit further into the mansion, you see this crow in my inventory? It's actually alive. Injured, sure, but definitely still alive. And as you walk around the mansion after discovering the crow, you can still see and hear its pained cries as an injured animal from within your inventory, which is always on screen. It's unsettling and heartbreaking, and the more I walked around with it, the more I felt terrible for it, and it made me really anxious to get rid of it, which honestly poses a lot of questions about how you'd feel carrying around a living thing in your inventory. It's unsettling, sure, but it's also pretty unique to see, again, a living being that is displayed with animation on screen in your inventory, and I just thought this was a really nice touch that differentiated it from other point-and-click games that I've played in the past. Also totally brilliant are the puzzles in the environment. I got stuck for about an hour not knowing where to go next, so I went back and double-checked every available room in the mansion until finally I found what was previously thought to be an innocuous cloth in the kitchen, and then it randomly popped into my brain that one of the paintings I'd found earlier mentioned having a portion of fresh paint on it. And in turn I went running back to where that painting was to find that yes, I absolutely had unstuck myself and that was the correct solution to the puzzle. And I have to say, this game is overflowing with those little aha moments that make you feel super smart, as any good video game puzzle should. Steam Deck performance is top-notch, predictably. The only thing that I'll say is that while you can play it with touchpads, you might prefer to use a mouse to play this in docked or tabletop mode, or at least that's what I did, but honestly I think either one will work pretty well after testing them out, and I think it really just depends on where you want to have an engaging narrative experience like this. Some people might prefer playing in handheld like they're curled up with a good book, while others might prefer a docked experience to get more immersed in the on-screen action. Although I do use the term action here quite loosely because again, we are talking about a point-and-click adventure here. But nonetheless, if you're the sort that really prefers a story-heavy horror experience, then you should definitely give The Last Door a look. And next up, with The Last Door out of the way, let's go ahead and move forward in time a little bit in terms of graphical fidelity and check out CrossCode. And good lord, right from the jump, I just love how pretty this menu is. Like, I knew from the second I saw this thing pop up that I was going to dig this game because it might be the chillest intro to a not very chill game that I've ever seen. And after an excellent little prelude to the game, you'll be introduced to an avatar named Leah, who you'll be controlling in a fictional MMO called Crossworlds. Now, tragically, you have no memory of why you're there, and also you don't have the ability to speak, but over time pieces of this will be rectified. In the interim though, it's really heartwarming and kinda sad actually to see Leah gradually regain some language functionality as she interacts with a whole host of colorful characters throughout. And honestly, I just wanted to keep playing this one, not just because it's a fun 2D Soulsy action RPG that feels like a game I probably should have grown up with in an alternate universe, but it's also pretty stunning visually, seeing these different 16-bit era cutscenes, and I really hope they're peppered throughout the entire thing. And going back to Leah's inability to speak, I really like this on two distinct levels. One, it's just interesting storytelling, but two, it sort of provides a more plausible reason of why we might be playing as a silent protagonist, which is fun because you don't really see that happen a whole lot nowadays. And when you do find a silent protagonist, there's never really a convincing reason for it. We just sort of accept that's by design and that's sort of the end of it. Another design choice I really appreciated was the ability to jump into the menu and just instantly scroll through some recent dialogue right from the start menu. I think that's a pretty big oversight by a lot of games that go the retro route with a heavy narrative. Sometimes they don't take into account that it can be hard to keep track of a massive amount of text, so it's nice to be able to review these recent bits more readily. Also, it's sort of adorable that Leah gradually gets extra things she can say, but realizing she's only limited to a few words and seeing the emotion that comes across her face really is something. But beyond the colorful characters and unique premise, the primary draw here I'd say is the combat, which really does feel pretty layered despite most of it being done with just the shoulder buttons. Also, it wasn't until a few minutes into this first boss fight that I realized I was fighting a giant enemy crab, which I don't know for certain, but that may in fact be a nod to that 2006 E3 presentation for Genji 2 with the giant enemy crab.
So here's this giant enemy crab.
I don't know for sure, but it seems plausible. But anyways, going back to the combat, it is really fun and dynamic, fusing the chaos of a bullet hell with the precision of an action RPG. But it's also no slouch in the puzzle department either. Normally I'd kind of groan about puzzles in a game where the action is so thoroughly smooth, but to be fair, they're satisfying to solve and usually provide a nice breather after dispatching a few waves of fairly relentless enemies. All this is to say I'm really enjoying the ramp up here so far, and it shows a ton of promise. I did find the intro to be a little overly long and tutorialized, but to be fair, there are a lot of non-standard mechanics on offer here, so it's probably warranted. So far it feels like I could probably nitpick the characters or presentation or combat just here and there with some tiny gripes, but ultimately I think CrossCode will end up being better than the sum of its parts. Steam Deck performance is pretty solid with mostly 60 FPS as far as I can tell, although occasionally hopping into and out of menus it might drop a little bit, but yeah, by and large as a top-down 2D game, it has no real trouble to speak of. And next up, moving slightly forward into the PlayStation era, we have what appears to be a loving homage to Dino Crisis, although it is a first-person shooter, and that would be Dino Trauma. Now, it's been forever since I played Dino Crisis, but I did fire it up recently to capture some footage for this video, and I remember really loving this game as more of a grounded alternative to the zombie or cult-based horror that I was so used to in other games from the PS1 era. So firing up Dino Trauma really seemed like a no-brainer for me. At first I wasn't sure how well I'd like the first-person perspective for this, probably only because of my bias towards Capcom's early days with fixed camera angle horror, but honestly it worked really well and it still had a way of unnerving me pretty easily. The premise is pretty straightforward stuff. You're introduced to a secret laboratory somewhere in Eastern Europe, and there are dinosaurs. And true to form, in addition to dispatching any raptors you come across while exploring the environment, you'll also be solving puzzles and picking up keycards to unlock different areas, find better firepower, and ultimately make your way through a PS1-era Jurassic Park adventure. It plays great on the Steam Deck, but there were some design choices that threw me off a little bit from a control perspective. Using my same default controller config I always used, I found that some of the mappings were just a little bit weird. Like for instance, reload in my opinion should always be mapped to X on a controller for first-person shooters, but here was actually mapped to Y, which I thought was just a little bit weird. I mean, it's not a major problem or anything, and you could always remap them, but, you know, it was admittedly a minor gripe, I guess. And the only other real problem that I have with Dino Trauma was something that was just a screw-up on my part, and that was that I backed out to the main menu without taking the time to manually save, which was pretty common in the era, but hey, that's pretty much on me. So far it feels fairly basic, but in the game's defense, this is an early access title. But nonetheless, it does show a lot of promise as a spooky throwback to a simpler era. I really like the ambient sound, and it's spooky exploring a dino-ridden laboratory with only a flashlight in some instances. Also, it did do that thing that I love where it has a TV showing actual movie clips, and unless I miss my guess, I'm pretty sure they are showing Night of the Living Dead here, but I could be wrong. From the outset, you'll have a cattle prod, a pistol, and I think later on you find the shotgun not too far into that first stage. And so far I would say the weapons feel pretty rudimentary, but maybe I'll unlock something a lot cooler later on. I'll just have to wait until I get more time with it to see. Steam Deck performance is really solid, and on the visuals front, you can tweak some of these settings if you want to lean heavier into a retro look. By default, they don't enable chromatic aberration, but I went ahead and flipped it on to make the graphics a little grimier in that low poly 5th gen sort of way. Now overall, do I think this is going to grab me as much as the original Dino Crisis did? Probably not. I mean, it's kinda too early for me to tell at this point, but I can certainly say it's off to a tremendous start. And honestly, that first-person approach sure seems like a great, if not somewhat familiar way to tackle the man versus prehistoric beast premise, if Turok taught me anything. And speaking of Capcom throwbacks, this next one is a game that I managed to avoid for almost a decade, and probably not without good reason, and that would be Resident Evil 6. And as I started work on this video, I thought I remembered that I actually did have a physical copy of this game, and sure enough, I did have a physical copy of this game that is completely unopened for the 360, and I remember that I actually won it at a Dave & Buster's like a decade ago, and I just thought that was really funny that, despite the fact that I've never played it, I still technically have an unopened copy of it, but, now I have it on Steam, so anyways. Now that I do have an easily accessible copy without opening what will probably not be a collector's item, I am fairly excited to explore this if for no other reason than just to kind of fill some gaps in my Resident Evil knowledge. Plus, it does feature local and online co-op, and that same buddy who recommended The Last Order to me expressed some interest in playing Resident Evil 6, so I figure at the very least, even if it is a completely terrible game, at the very least we can kind of mess around and, kind of mystery science theater this thing. Now, in terms of how Resident Evil 6 is so far with my limited experience exploring only Chris's campaign, it's kind of a weird question to answer by nature of the fact that Resident Evil 6's structure is kind of an odd duck. The initial tutorial represents what I'm guessing is a pretty complete vertical slice of what waits for players in the rest of Resident Evil 6's 4 different co-op campaigns. You'll look for items, shoot a few zombies, and quick time your way through multiple big beefy action set pieces. And even with this brief glimpse into the rest of Resident Evil 6's gameplay, it's immediately clear that the course correction Resident Evil 7 brought into the series was definitely the right choice. But here's the thing, I don't need a game to be a perfect 10 to enjoy it, and so far I have to say I'm really enjoying Resident Evil 6, if for no other reason than it's filling a gap again in my Resident Evil series knowledge. On the gameplay front, it definitely leans more into the action-oriented feel of Resident Evil 5, with even more over-the-topness, but I don't hate that, right? I know by most Resident Evil connoisseurs' reckoning maybe I should hate it, but honestly I don't. It's big, dumb action fun, and man, I just eat that stuff up. Or more to the point, I guess I would say so far it's kind of a bottom-tier Resident Evil game, but as just an action-heavy late 2000s / early 2010s bag of action nonsense, it's definitely fun. I like jumping out of helicopters with a bunch of mercenary dudes and traversing a city in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. And outside of Resident Evil 3 and some brief portions of Resident Evil 2, I don't think we've gotten a ton of zombie action at city street levels. Beyond leaning more into action, there were definitely some technical problems. Like there's this one portion of Chris's campaign where there was a mutated horror that just kind of got stuck walking against the wall while only one of my 3 squad mates opened fire on it. It's definitely not great, but sort of unintentionally hilarious, or at least adorable at the very least. On a high note, it at least maintains a steady 60 FPS on the Steam Deck, and that's with the graphics cranked all the way up to Ultra. Now, do I recommend that you play Resident Evil Army of Two Edition? I don't know if I can say that, but what I will say is that I went in expecting the worst, and I came away smiling knowing that, for $5, I'm definitely getting more than my money's worth. And provided you're not a purist who demands only like the most top-tier Resident Evil experience, you might enjoy what's on offer here as well, and honestly, it's not the worst way to experience this and roll the dice on what might be the most divisive entry in the series. And finally, let's go ahead and end this list on an action-heavy note also from Capcom, and that would be the reboot of Devil May Cry that came out in 2013, which I only recently learned actually exists in a parallel universe right alongside the main Devil May Cry continuity. Now, personally, I have a mixed history with Devil May Cry. I beat 1, 2, and 3 back in the day, and dabbled with 4, but have barely touched 5. Although for a brief window during the PlayStation 3 era, I actually did spend a fair amount of time with this one, even though I didn't finish it, so now seems like a great way to give it another spin, since the deck's so great at playing older games anyways. And it's a pretty standard setup where you'll be playing as this alternate Dante and predictably kick off by squaring up with a bunch of demons and a flashy boss fight. At the conclusion of which your adventure will begin proper and you'll find yourself pulled into the fold of the Order, an organization bent on tracking demonic activity and their affiliations within the world of politics, banking, and pop culture. Dante still nails it as the reluctant hero with an appropriately Devil May Care attitude from the outset, but I gotta say, those cutscenes are pretty great in a hammy over-the-top way, which is exactly what I look for in a good Devil May Cry experience. It's not all surface level fluff though. The action mechanics are as tight as they've ever been here, and while some people might be put off by what feels like a non-canonical Dante, I'd encourage you to still give it a shot because he has more than enough of his own charm, and I can't say that slipping into this Dante's boots and coat felt really significantly different than what I played in any other Devil May Cry title. It's just big, loud, over-the-top action fun. Sure, it's a little linear, but in that kind of breezy late 2000s sort of way. And after having played in so many interconnected action sandboxes over the past couple of years, it was really nice playing a game with a more retro level structure and just straightforward arcade mechanics. Plus, it's great fun seeing your combat rating skyrocket as you mix up your attacks and decimate all manner of hellish enemies from one room to the next. It's high-octane, trashy action nonsense laid over a foundation of Ninja Theory combat, and it runs like a dream on the Steam Deck. So if action games are your jam and you've never played the reboot/alt-universe Dante until now, I think it's definitely worth a look, particularly if you can get it on sale considering it is a fairly short game at I believe 10 to 15 hours, depending on how much of a completionist you are. Alright, so that's it for this video. Not every game that I grabbed during the spring sale, but most of them, and I'm sure I'll cover one or two more as I actually get some time to play them in next month's pickups videos. But hey, what about you? Did you grab anything pretty great during the Steam sale? If so, I would love to hear what you picked up, since a lot of what you recommend gets added to my library on a long enough timeline. And speaking of which, Dino Trauma, that was not one that I randomly sought out. Rather, Yog Ball had recommended that, I believe, so thank you for that, because I'm having fun with it so far and hope to spend more time with it, some spooky evening where I want to have like some Dino Crisis-y action, I guess. But anyways, as always, thanks so much for your time, take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.